Ses deneme, ses prova. Ses prova, ses deneme 1, 2, 3, 4. Ses prova. Ses deneme, ses prova 1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for attending the best practices session on establishing and supporting CERTs for internet security. My name is Maarten van Horenbeek, and I'm the president of an organization called FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. And I'm here together with two other lead experts that were invited to run this session, run the preparatory process, and finally get to deliverables. And those people are Adli Wahid, also of FIRST. He is our outreach liaison, and Christine Hoopers from CERT.br. In addition, we have Wout de Natries, who will be our note taker today, and who is actually the consultant that has been compiling and assembling all the findings in our document, which is now open for comment on the IGF website. To really give a very quick introduction in the process that will follow today, because we have a very short amount of time to actually cover quite a bit of work that happened in the last few weeks. What we will do is we will start off with a very quick introduction to set the stage for individuals attending that may not be very familiar with the CCERT community. So Christine will give a quick introduction on what a CCERT really is, what they do at a very, very high level, so we can delve in deep after that. We'll also look at the stakeholder groups and finally have a look at the document today. We have a set of slides that summarizes the document. Important to note is that the wording is not 100% identical to the document. That's not possible within the space that we have in slide decks. So what we will do is we will walk through those slides, provide some comment, and then open it up for comment from all the people that are attending here today. All of those comments will be taken back into the final document. Now, one thing that I would like to note is that we'll be very careful on how we spend our time. So that means we will go over certain topics fairly quickly. I think it's important for all of you to realize that we do want you to be heard. So if you don't have the opportunity to comment in this session, please go online. The document, the period for comments is now open until end of day tomorrow. There is some discussion about extending it, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. But for now, please put in any comments that you might have and you can't introduce today on the document. Now, to get started very quickly, could I have a show of hands here from who is actually from the government stakeholder community? Excellent. So we have a few people from the government community. Who here represents civil society? Excellent. So we have some civil society. Who here represents the technical community? Okay, excellent. And finally, private sector. Do we have representatives from the private sector? Excellent. So we seem to have a couple of good groups here for the discussion. To move into the discussion, one thing that I'd like to understand from each of the communities, and we have a common who would like to comment on outcomes that you would like to see from this process. Okay, there are no opening comments from the government stakeholder community.
Oh, yes. So Martin, can I just ask are you regarding the EU as a government or what?
I think that would work for the government community for now. So if you would be willing to contribute something, we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, so my name's Patrick Curry, and we have actually spoken on the phone. But I chair two of the subgroups under the EU cybersecurity strategy for the NIS directive. on instant notification and information sharing, and on risk management. And that involves organizations like CERT and governments and industry. And I think that at the very high level, what's really come through is the requirement for collaboration in a major way, and for the mechanics to be in place for risk assessment, interoperability, and for trust, the trust mechanisms that we would understand as AAA. And so there's a lot of work in that space. So it's building, if you like, the foundations on which CERTs can work together. There's a very strong demand for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that contribution. Yes, Jordana.
Thought I would just add something from a government perspective as well. I'm Jordana Siegel. I'm from the Department of Homeland Security in the United States, which includes the U.S. Computer Emergency Response Team, Readiness Team in the U.S. CERT, as well as our ICS CERT, Industrial Control Systems Focused CERT. And in terms of outcomes from this session, I would just say that I think that one thing that would be very valuable from our perspective is thinking about how the multi-stakeholder model can enhance the work that CERTs do around the world. Certainly, CERTs are not just governmental, they're industry, they're academic, they're otherwise, and I think that just thinking about how the stakeholders that come to IGF can work together better to enhance the type of work that CERTs do would be really beneficial.
Thank you very much. Are there any contributions from civil society? What would civil society like to see come out of this best practices effort? Yes.
Sorry. I'm Dr. Mona Al-Ashar. I'm from the Francophone group here. I am at the same time the president of the Lebanese Information Technology Association and a member of the cybersecurity panel at the World Federation of Scientists. And at the same time, I'm a member founder of the Pan-Arab Observatory for Cybersecurity. Well, I would like to know or to see at the session how we can, as civil society, really instigate the awareness, the common work, especially in the Arab world, for a better management of cybersecurity risks and threats. And actually, I would like also to know if there is any chance for CERT, private CERT, because, you know, we don't have a CERT in Lebanon. They are working with the ITU to create one, but we do think that maybe the private sector won't be so trustful to work with governmental. Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm saying maybe. So it could be a good idea to have a CERT private, yes or no. That's it. And because we work on capacity building, actually, for cybersecurity, for CERT, as an association, we have cooperated with the Francophonie on a seminar for the Ministry of Defense in Lebanon on creating a CERT. So we are active and we want to know what we can do to enhance cybersecurity.
Thank you for that contribution. I hope the document will answer some of those questions, and we look very much forward to your participation in the discussion of it. Moving on to the technical community, is there any input from the technical community on what they would like to see from this effort? Yes. Okay. Paul, to your left.
I am Paul Vixie from Farside Security. The CERT community, international community of CERTs, is a big part of the market for a lot of the new startups in the cybersecurity industry. And a lot of what's being sold is junk. And I have found in my dealings with the CERTs across the world that the older ones know the difference between junk and not junk, and the newer ones are often wondering about the difference. I'm hoping from the outcome from these documents that you're preparing that we're going to level set across the industry and keep your average VC-funded security company that gets started once a week on Sand Hill Road from being able to succeed by preying on the ignorance of some of the newer CERTs. Thank you.
Thank you for that input. Moving on to private sector. Is there anyone from private sector who can share some thoughts on preferred outcomes? Yes, Patrick, I guess you're speaking to the community center.
I'm sorry, I run two collaborative organizations which are international, and they have industry and government involvement. I would offer 2 points. The first is on CERTs. I completely agree. The problem of expanding CERTs into lesser developed communities, and the requirements for coordination and help. And for that, I give an example of the ANISA review that went from 42 CERTs to 220 CERTs in the space of 3 years. Now, this begs a question, which is, what is a CERT? Because CERTs are very different in their character and nature, depending where you look, and we don't have enough terminology to describe this. The second point that goes with this is that we're already finding a very strong linkage between CERTs in their operation at different levels and counter-fraud in particular, and cybercrime. This is bringing in a far greater degree of law enforcement and human actor behavior, and also a link out to crisis management. And we've had this particularly in air traffic management, for example.
Thank you very much. I would encourage anyone, as the discussion continues, to take into account these needs from the different stakeholder communities, recognizing that they may not be comprehensively covering each community, but take them into account as you provide input or questions. Now, moving along, I'd like to give Christine a quick opportunity to sort of provide a level set on what we're covering in this discussion and what the CCERT community is like.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm Christine. Before we work into the document, one of the things we thought would be beneficial is to try to define what is a CERT, what's a CCERT. So this is a classic definition that it's like one of the oldest ones. This is why we kind of stick to it. That really a CCERT, it's not necessarily a company or a department. It can be both. It can be not-for-profit. It could be internal or external, serving a region, a country, a small organization, a university. But the basic point is that they would receive notices about incidents that could be coming from appliances, or that could be coming from emails from people, that could be coming from a call. Really, you are noticing that you have incidents, you analyze those, and you help your organization to respond in the best manner possible. So this is, I think, the best definition of a CCERT, and this is why a lot of people want to have like this narrow definition, and it usually gets a little bit broader because CCERTs serve diverse communities, and these communities are defined as a constituency. This is a word that we'll be saying here today a lot. So this is why we thought it would be nice to define. So a constituency is basically the public that you serve. That could be customers from your CCERT, that could be the citizens in a country, those could be users of a specific service, could be employees of a company. That basically is the constituency. And when we are talking about an incident, it is very technical in nature, usually, and it is really any suspect behavior or any event that happens in a network that could affect its security. Not necessarily we are only dealing with attacks that actually were successful in some way. Sometimes all our work is to see the hints, to see what's going on, and try to prevent incidents from happening. So there is a lot of proactive and reactive things going on. When I'm discussing later on the definition of the issue, we are going to go a little bit further into services. But I think it's important to know that we are dealing with incidents, with facts, usually technical in nature, or that could be from behavior of people, from doing something wrong or configuring something wrong in your network. But we need to help these people to understand this incident and to respond in the best way possible. And just to set a little bit on history, it's always good to remember that the first team that was created was the CERT Coordination Center. And it was created in reaction to the first big incident that we have on the internet, and that happened on 1988. That was when we had the Morris Worm that actually stopped like 60% of the internet at the time. And that was the point when people came together and said, probably this is going to happen more frequently in the future. This is a problem that's coming on. So how could we address? So this is how it started, purely reactive, but it evolved a long time to having CERTs, having CERTs in different organizations, so having computer security instant response teams serving distributedly communities, because the internet is distributed. So communities, because the internet is distributed communities, because the internet is distributed communities, because the internet is distributed communities, because the internet is distributed. There's some things going on the mic. So they work in a cooperation network. There is no hierarchy in cooperation. Really, the cooperation is based on trust, is based on teams knowing each other's missions, knowing the technical competency, knowing that they can trust confidences about attack techniques, about threats, about what is going on. And this helps each individual organization to improve its own security. And as a larger goal, it helps the whole internet ecosystem to be more secure. So we will be talking a lot about cooperation and about teams, and we thought it would be beneficial to have like this first terminology and organization here. And before we move to the document, we would like to give a little bit time for other thing that in the mailing list transpired a lot, and there are a lot of forums where CERTs meet, and these forums, they have different reasons why they were created, and we would like some people here that are present from these forums to be able to speak a little bit too about them. So I think we can pass to you.
Thank you very much, Christine. So yes, as Christine mentioned, we're lucky to have a lot of people here with a wealth of experience in that wider community. And I'd first like to call Yuri Ito, who is the chair of AP CERT, to very briefly introduce the organization. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Yuri Ito. I am chairing AP CERT, which is the Asia Pacific Computer Emergency Response Team. This is a CERT collaboration framework. We have 22 teams from 19 economies get together and work together to for the regional level of cybersecurity risk reduction. We're focusing on, of course, we do instant response assistance each other, help each other share information to remediate the threat, but at the same time, we focus clean up the botnet, clean up infected machines, removing botnet, and then try to raise cyber hygiene in each region. And then we share the goals. We define the shared goals that we're trying to make the regional cyberspace cleaner and safer and more resilient. So with that theme, we have an annual general meeting. Once a year, we have face-to-face meeting. And then we have a safe, secure mailing list. We're providing the infrastructure for the members to communicate and do instant response. Also, we have a point of contact arrangement. They are economies which has more than one members from one economies. We asked each economies to assign one point of contact. So when we have a severe incident, we know where is, and then these teams are arranged to be be able to provide the fastest response. So that's, we call it a point of contact arrangement. We conduct cybersecurity drill once a year. We share the network monitoring sensors, and that's also real-time data sharing with the member teams. We do have the multi-stakeholder approach, working with the intergovernmental. So this AP CERT itself is the CERTs community, but we work with the APICTEL and other intergovernmental organizations, providing them the technical insight, what's the problem, what's the threat, and that type of information. We work with the Asia Pacific Internet community, Apricot, and in the AP STAR community. So it's doable.
Next is Africa CERT, and Jean-Robert Hoentemey of Africa CERT had initially planned to be here, but unfortunately couldn't make it, so he sent a very short statement. At the Conference on Internet Governance under the theme Administration of Internet Protocol Addresses and Domain Names and Strengthening African Emerging Institutions in Cotonou, December 15 to 17, 1998, African pioneers called for uniting the African Internet community through the establishment of several organizations to tackle specific issues. The organizations are known as African Organization of Internet Governance, and among them Africa CERT, facilitated by the African Network Operator Group, the Regional Internet Registry, the Association of African Universities, the African Research and Education Network, and the Africa-Asia Forum on Network Research and Engineering, with the support of JP CERT and AP CERT. The objectives of Africa CERT include, but are not restricted to, coordinating cooperation among CERTs, assisting African countries in establishing CERTs, fostering and supporting education and outreach programs in ICT security, strengthening the relationship among CERTs in Africa and with stakeholders across the world, encouraging information sharing, promoting good practices and experiences sharing among members to develop a comprehensive framework for cybersecurity, assisting African CERTs in improving cyber readiness and enhancing the resilience of ICT infrastructure, and finally promoting collaborative technology research, development and innovation in the ICT security field. Then there's the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation CERT, and Adli can tell us a little bit more about what they do.
Hello everyone, my name is Adli. So the OIC CERT objective is to provide platform for member countries to explore and develop collaborative initiative and possible partnership in matters pertaining to cybersecurity. So this is not an operational CERT, it is more like an association. However, the OIC CERT is a legal entity which is attached to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and they were established from a meeting in Uganda in 2008. The OIC CERT currently has 21 members, I'm sorry, and their activities are almost the same like AP CERT, which is they have an annual meeting, cybersecurity exercises, training, and other than that, as and when there is an incident in each member countries, they communicate and share information with one another. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adli. Christine, can you share a little bit about what LAC CERTs does?
In Latin America, we have an initiative that is bottom-up. It is an initiative that's being sponsored by LACNIC and LACNOG. So LACNIC is the Latin American Caribbean Internet Registry, and LACNOG is the Network Operators Group. This initiative, it's actually, instead of creating a formal organization to try to decide top-down and foster teams, we are going where the people that are doing the actual network operators, where they're meeting, that is the LACNOG and LACNIC meeting, to bring the message. They ask for a better forum to meet, so LACNIC is helping us every meeting twice a year to meet all the teams from the region. And this is not only for formed teams. We have this meeting where anyone that is interested in learning what is a CERT and interested in forming their own CERT, they can meet with the CERTs from the region and learn from experience and try to identify what are the common goals, what are models that could work, and what are the differences between the services. We are going to our 7th meeting now in October, together with LACNIC meeting. And in the last meeting, we had people from 30 organizations from 16 different countries. And we have teams from academia, from the financial sector, from ISPs, government, and military attending those meetings. We maintain a mailing list that is open not only to people that go to the meetings, but anyone that is working with incident response in the region. We are hosting a monthly web meeting that is getting people together now to start talking about sharing information, sharing best practices that apply to some regional contexts. And the idea to collocate these meetings with LACNIC and LACNOG, it's because all these people are already going there. We have like problems with costs, so we actually just can leverage from people already traveling and meeting, and this is a way to reduce the cost of getting CERTs together and also get the whole community and other stakeholders to understand what we are doing in the region. So this is basically how CERTs is organized. We are going from very informal to a point that probably will get more formal in the future, but it's a complete bottom-up and multi-stakeholder group that is meeting in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Finally, on this deck you can see 3 other organizations, and I do not believe we have any representatives here from either TFC CERT or EGC CERT, but if there are, please feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me. But as a very quick introduction, TFC CERT is an organization of CERT teams mainly in Europe, and they operate a program that is particularly interesting called Trusted Introducer, which is a way for CERTs to be accredited or listed based on the existing relationships that they have within the community. EGC CERT is a fairly unique organization because they are a closer knit community of CERT teams, all from the government CERT community across Europe. And then finally, FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, is a global organization that aims to bring together security teams based on a vetting process in which teams are essentially reviewed by other members to see if they meet the minimum requirements to join that community. And once they join, they benefit from the ability to share best practices, share experiences, work on standards together. And the organization also organizes conferences and symposia across the world to bring the CERT community closer together. Moving into the bulk of today's session, what we will do next is, as you are aware, over the last 6 to 8 weeks, there has been a discussion taking place on a mailing list, which was organized by the IGF. And on that mailing list, several people from various stakeholders communities have been able to share ideas and thoughts and concerns that they had with the way the CERT community works today, and ideas on how CERTs can better work with other parties in the stakeholder communities. Now, all of that work has been assembled into a document which is today published on the IGF website. It has been open for review, I believe, for the last 2 weeks. What we will do today is we will walk through some of the entries in that document based on the outline as defined by the multi-stakeholder advisory group. We'll open for some very brief comments from the participants on each of those sections. We will note those comments and take them with us as the final document is being assembled. And again, there won't be time to open it up for wide participation simply due to the time limit that we are dealing with today. But what we will do is, if you're unable to get your input in this session today, please go to the website, provide comment on the site, and I guarantee that all of the comments that are listed there will be taken into account as the document is being assembled. First, we'll start off with the first major section of the document, which is definition of the issue, and Christine will be guiding us through that section.
Thank you, Martin. As Martin said, I'm just going to try to highlight what's in the document, especially for people that didn't have time to read the document or that don't remember everything that's in there. And then we're going to open for comments for any issues that people might have. So our document starts defining what is a CERT, and as Martin said, this document, it actually gets all the input that was discussed in the mailing list and submissions that were sent. In our discussion, it was very clear that all people contributed that there are very different types of CERTs in many different organizations with different objectives and with different naming. So naming is not a norm, is not, you don't need to be called a CERT, an IRT, a CERT. What is really important is the community you serve and the services you provide. These teams, as I said before, they are within government organizations, academia, private organizations, not-for-profit organizations. Like JP CERT is a good example that it's a not-for-profit separate organization that is also a national team. And they come with all varieties. These organizations work for their own constituency. They sometimes assist customers or other organizations through services. So there are also like some companies that provide CERT services. But there is the main consensus is that when you have an incident response team, it is a team of experts that responds to incidents, that coordinates the resolution. What that means is that you get everyone that needs to be involved into the solution to understand the problem, to do their own part into it, and try to coordinate efforts to mitigate a threat, to respond to an incident, and to try not to repeat the incident in the future. And it was also a consensus that CERTs are involved a lot in the technical mitigation and in trying to improve the risk reduction and the internet health. So this is where CERTs have been moving more into the proactive part of their work. So a lot of discussion was, should we call a CERT, a CERT? What is the difference between a computer emergency response team and a computer security incident response team? And this was also a consensus that like a more generic, a more neutral term that actually represents better what teams do is CERT, that actually we deal with incident response, because depending on the context that you are, the word emergency sometimes is too strong, because we are not necessarily dealing with things that sometimes could be perceived as an emergency by some communities. And this sometimes leads to some misunderstandings on the mission of a team. So it was after this discussion that the whole group decided that we should keep CERT as the term, Computer Security Incident Response Team, because that better reflects the nature of the work that we do, that is really dealing with incidents on computer systems on the internet as a whole. So the other point, I need to point to the sky here for the thing to move.
Christine, can I ask, do you want to have any input, or do you want to have questions at the end?
Because otherwise we could be keeping, so this is why I say, for every session we are going to go to the end and then we're going to open, because otherwise we can run out of time and not have time to cover everything. So as Martin said, we could have an afternoon, we could have the whole week to discuss this really. So, and another discussion was a lot of questions about what are national CERTs, what are national teams, and what are teams of last resort. So we tried to capture in the document as best as we could that discussion that happened on the mailing list. So one of the consensus was that a CERT of last resort is a CERT that someone can turn to when you find no one else. So that happens a lot in our day-to-day lives. Like I have an incident in Japan. If I know a CERT in Japan that I can contact directly, that would speed up mitigation. But sometimes it's not a team that's in any forum, it's a network that I don't know, so I can go to, for example, JP CERT that also acts as a CERT of last resort and ask them, could you help us to find the right person? Could you help us to mitigate? And also most of the times, national teams are also teams of last resort, but it was brought in the discussions that more and more we are having more teams for networks of national importance, for critical infrastructures, for sectors, and there is no right or wrong. Not all teams are maintained by the governments, not all teams have the same mission, or not all of them provide services to citizens or to critical infrastructure. There is a mix. And from what people contributed, it appears that all of models have like benefits and disadvantages. But usually the decision on how to set up a national team, it's based on local culture, based on who has expertise and who has funding to create a national team. And there are several factors that impact on that decision. So the experience of the teams that were discussing in there, national teams and some other organizations that work with national teams, was that the experience was that each country will need to identify what works best. And this is what was the discussion about national teams. And the last two slides, like we discussed about services, we didn't put too much detail into services because you'll see in the document that ENISA has documents describing CERT Coordination Center. There is a document that was written by TFC CERT from Europe and CERT-CC and everyone that describes at length. So we just pointed that from the evolution, so maybe people can wake up with things dropping there. So we have reactive services. That's how it all started in '88. That you have an event, you have an incident, you have an attack, and you have to react quickly, because as quick as you react, you have less damage, you have less impact, and you can really make the problem not be so bad. But more and more we have teams working proactively because CERTs identify the threats, they see what's more common. And usually when you are handling an incident, when you're responding to an incident, you can identify the root cause. And then you can try to work with all the stakeholders to try to address that for that incident not be repeating itself a long time. So the proactive services, they involve from awareness to helping organizations to better set up and protect their systems. And there are some teams that have what is being described as security quality management services that are actually services to augment other services. That could be risk analysis, could be security of systems. So it is a mix of services. And there's also the point that as we have diverse teams, some teams provide the services to their own community, but most of the teams also have a lot of what could be perceived as services when they cooperate with other teams. Usually you share data about new threats, about attack techniques. You have like data feeds from organizations. So there's some information that goes on that could be also perceived as a service. There was a discussion and a lot of questions about tools. What are the tools that CERTs need? And I think it was a consensus that the tools are related to the services you provide. At least you need some tool to kind of track incidents, to have some statistics, to know what you're dealing with. But apart from that, probably the tools will be linked to the services you provide. And some discussion was brought that maybe dealing with data feeds would be seen as a tool. And for people that are not used, data feeds is really, we are having a lot of people on the internet detecting incidents, leaving networks. And you can share that information with the network owner usually to help them improve their security and notice that they are generating incidents to the internet. So this is a work that CERTs have been doing a lot, that is to share these data feeds for cleaning infected computers with botnets, for working with other organizations. And the last point that was discussed before we go for a discussion of the defining the issue is industry cooperation. There is a lot of cooperation going on. People brought that in some specific industry sectors, we have seen some countries that didn't have any resources, and you have, even although you have several organizations in one sector that could be competing against each other, be it financial, telecommunication, or other sector, they decided to join forces and create one team for the whole sector, operational for them. So we shared there were some examples shared. In other countries or economies, we have the model of an information and analysis center, that's the ISAC model, where usually the organizations themselves have their own teams, but they get together in a forum to exchange information pertaining to that specific sector. So you could have a financial sector, ISAC, critical infrastructure, telecommunications, so it all depends on the country you are. And most of the private organizations, they can operate their own team and cooperate with other organizations. There was a lot of discussion with questions about management strategies, but the consensus was that there is a lot of documentation. In the document we have links to ENISA, to CERT-CC, to AP CERT, to JP CERT, to all best practices about how to set up and manage your team. So at the end, we didn't put this load of information in the document, we just put pointers to other documents. So this is an overview of defining the issue, and I think we would like to open the floor for comments or issues.
One thing that I'd like to note is when you provide a comment, any type of comment is very welcome. One thing that I'd specifically like to ask you to think about is what other opportunities do you see here for where other stakeholder communities would value becoming involved in this type of effort? Because a lot of this work actually does come from the technical community, because that's where most of the CERTs operate. At the same time, there is a lot of opportunity for other communities to provide feedback on these issues. And so if you see opportunities for where the discussion needs to deepen, definitely share those. Outside of that, we're open for comments on this first section out of a total of 6 that will come ahead. Sorry, did you have a comment?
No, I have a question.
Oh, please go ahead.
Because following what Christine was saying, I have this feeling that we can create a response team and we can call it whatever we want. Is that true?
Yeah, basically what happens is that the name is not really the most important thing. We have seen a lot of confusion with people that are new. Can I call it an incident response team, a CERT, a CCERT? Basically, I didn't stress that much, like CERT is a trademark in US and Europe. The reasons for creating the trademark were because some people were abusing it and trying to sell services that were not good, so CERT-CC created it. But really, you were doing incident response. So how you call it is not really important, at least was never important for the technical community, and has never impeded anyone from creating a team. What we see happening is that sometimes as the community at large in a specific country, for example, recognizes the term CERT, then it's easier for the people to understand what you do because you call it CERT. Like in Latin America, most of the teams are just calling themselves CERTs, but because the term is very recognized in the region. So I think it all depends on what you are going, but these terms are interchangeable in most of that. I think Jordana has a comment on that.
I just wanted to say, from our experience in the United States, even in my organization, we have 2 CERTs, as I mentioned before, and one is the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, because a decision was taken when the CERT was formed that it wasn't just about response, but also prevention, and so it wanted to reflect both of those concepts in the name. But that was just a decision of the director at the time. And then the ICS CERT, which is the Industrial Control Systems Computer Emergency Response Team. Again, that's a different name, although we're part of the same organization and we're part of the community of international CERTs with the same functions and services that Christine described. And so I think it's important to have that identifier so you know that you're part of that community, but I think the specific terminology is actually something that is not worth getting too focused on. It can become, I think lexicon often can become, sometimes it's important, but sometimes it can become a rabbit hole for discussion. And I think what's more important is sort of the commonality of terms and then the specific functions.
Just to add to that, I think it was not clear, but we discussed a lot. So you don't have that concept to have one team per country or a hierarchy. In Brazil, we have more than 40 CERTs established cooperating, and they are from all sectors. And some of them call themselves CERTs, IRTs, CERTs. Some of them just call them security and response teams. So there is a depth of acronyms and names that you can use because it all depends on your culture.
So I'd echo that one if I may, because we've seen, particularly out of the military community collaboratively, we've seen the requirements to get some kind of command and control structure to enable coordination across organizations for response purposes. And this goes from the complete tactical level right at the bottom, where we've used expressions like warning and reporting points and so on, so warps, and we've had, exactly as you say, CERTs, CERTs, and so on for different descriptors. The point is, what's happening inside an organization, what's happening across organizations, and so on. Now, this delayering is getting more complicated because we're now seeing breach response teams from insurance companies which are going in to help like a first aid squad when something goes wrong. And because they're providing cyber insurance, what they're doing is doing a complete risk assessment of an organization, both to cover the insurance, but they also then provide the service once an incident happens. So Neiman Marcus is a very good case in point. That had a breach response team that managed all aspects, including the public engagement of the incident as a whole. So the character and nature of this response has become more complicated because it has to deal with business risk at the same time as it's trying to deal with a threat or an attack, which might be inside or outside. And you know, you need to sort of call Ghostbusters at this point to come in. So yeah, the situation's getting more complicated, and I completely agree. It's a rainbow of names out there. It's just trying to understand where they sit in this matrix.
Thank you. We have time for one more question on this, and I see that you had something else, please.
Exactly. The question, I asked this question because I want to know if there is any implication or for the cooperation that this, whatever you will call it, will have. Because we know that CERTs or CERT or whatever maybe has to be accredited. It has to be to cooperate, maybe with law enforcement, across border. So according what I understood here, or I may be wrong, but it seems like we decide what we want to do according to the contracts we create, according with the bylaw we have of the CERT or the institution. And while I don't know, I had this idea that such organization has to be trustful, has to have norms, standards, whatever, because I'm thinking of the legal aspects.
Maybe one thing that is interesting in this respect is to not necessarily think of a CERT as a name, but as a set of services that it provides. And one thing that is fairly universal in the community is that CERTs tend to publish a document which is called an RFC 2350 document. And that document describes all the basic functionality of the CERT. So for instance, the services that it offers. So if you are going out to work with a particular CERT, you can usually find that document either on their website or published elsewhere, and it will actually describe what the CERT really does. And so I think that type of information is really helpful, and that type of information tends to be a requirement for a lot of the associations that we spoke about earlier. Many of them actually require the CERT to list out the type of services they offer. So I think it might make more sense to look at the functionality rather than the name. I don't know, Christine, if that covers.
Yeah. No, I'm just...
When you say that there is requirements, there is some conditions, so the nomination or the name counts. Because I cannot say I am a CERT when I'm not answering what is required for me to be a CERT.
In that level, yes, but we thought the question was, do I need to be called a CERT, an IRT? No. Just, I think to sum up, when we were talking about the document in this session, I think one of this discussion to me really makes it clear that really is a consensus that if you put the word emergency, it mixes things. There was a lot of discussions that we didn't put here, but were in the document, that it's really, people are confusing like national strategies with CERTs. Not necessarily you need a CERT to be like the one doing the army. We have like people using the term, and this is why in the document we stick to incident response team and not emergency response, because these could be perceived completely different. So I think this kind of reinforces for me what we were trying to get to a scope in this best practice, that we are talking about best practices for incident response, not best practices for like national cybersecurity strategies or something. So just to try to move forward, sum up this mix of things in there.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks to both of the commenters. That's really good feedback. And please continue that conversation both on the mailing list and in the review website that has been published by the IGF. Then we'll move into section 2, and section 2 is on regional specificities, and it will be Adli who will be driving this section.
did it. Okay. It's very technical. So one of the sections that we have in the document, and I hope you will have a look at the document, is regional specificities. This is basically a section where we try to collect information from people who participated in the process earlier on if there are certain trends in each region with regard to CERT in terms of capabilities, in terms of cost, in terms of legalities and things like that. Any information related to that. And the whole idea is to be able to see and get some inputs on whether or not there are certain things that are different from each region, or if there are opportunities for further improvements and things like that. So one of the key points that was discussed within that group was that when we talk about cybersecurity incidents, it is accepted by a lot of people or everyone in the CERT community that when you have an incident, you need collaboration. You need to work with more than one entity. So sometimes it's not just point to point with another organization. Sometimes it is you need to work with a lot of people in different places and so on and so forth. And this somehow lead to some expectation that the other party or the other team or the other entity have common capabilities or common skills to deal with that particular incident, or to have a process in place or tools or relevant tools to process the incident or to handle privacy of the incidents and so on and so forth, right? So there are some expectation of a common understanding on if you declare that you are doing CERT services, these are the set of things that it is sort of expected that you have in place. When we have cybersecurity incidents, it was also discussed that sometimes not everybody get the same incident, and therefore information sharing is very critical. And although there are platforms for doing so in terms of sharing information, still people in the group believe that one of the biggest challenges is making this knowledge global, meaning that making it scale. And also when we have to deal with many entities in different locations, different regions, then trust becomes an issue, right? So sometimes it is not sufficient to just exchange information via email. Sometimes there is a need to actually meet face to face first time and have some sort of discussion and do some other thing that CERTs do, exchanging PGP keys and things like that. Anyhow, we'll get more into that later on, but for this particular section, we also have some representative from some region, and we would like to invite them maybe to share some of their observation in terms of the trends or the features of CERTs in their region. So the first one that I have on my list is again Ms. Yuri Ito from JP-CERT and or AP-CERT. Maybe you could share some of the observation of the CERT in that region.
So CERT teams in Asia Pacific, very, very different. Excuse me. That's probably the characteristics of this region, and then could probably same in the other region as well. But the teams are coming from the different culture, of course, very, very different culture, political system different, social, different social systems, technical levels different. Team's authority is different. Some of the team has authority to ISPs to do something. Some of the teams do not have. For example, JP-CERT is just a coordination center. We're asking for the cooperation, but not having the enforcing authority. So authority is different. Different model of operation, funding model is different. Size of the CERT is very different from 200 to 2-3 people CERTs. So it's very different. I think one of the important thing is knowing the others, well. That's why we have a face-to-face meeting, get to know each other, what type of difference, knowing the other teams' authority and capability, rules. But most importantly, I think for gain the trust is based on the operation and then know how safely to handle the sensitive information or incident threat, that type of information. So knowing the rules of the CERT community. And those things are all in the CERT training material. And in this region, we're actively doing a CERT capacity building training. Also, once it's established, we'll keep having a CERTs training workshop. So through those type of things, we'll make sure we understand each other, we understand the rules, and so on. So that's the trust building, and there's an accreditation and vetting system as well in the CERT community. You know the existing CERT, and to 3 CERTs needs to nominate you to be a part of it. So have to start operating and gain trust. So that's the.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Next, I would like to call on Christine to maybe to share a bit on the South America perspective.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, I think, jump into challenges. I think one of the challenges we are seeing most of the Latin American and Caribbean regions is really issues with funding, with prioritizing creation and formalization of CERTs. Most of the organizations already do instant handling in an ad hoc manner, so they just get together, someone does it, not in an organized way. And a challenge is that usually people think that they need to create this really big organization that's very complex, but what they really need is to allocate like 1 or 2 people to do this full time. And once they understand that, it gets to a more maturity level, and then the next level is how do I cooperate? And the only way to really have meaningful cooperation is knowing each other, going to places, meeting each other, and gaining trust. There is no trust through a contract or an MOU in this community. It's really trust that you are doing the work well, that if I share any information with you, you are not going to share if it's not appropriate with anyone else, and that you have the capacity and the technical expertise to understand the incident, to understand the information you're dealing, and to help the community a lot. So I think this is one of the ways why we are actually just fostering having meetings and having people in a room twice a year at least to meet each other, to know each other's challenges. And one thing that I would say, we are going to our 7th meeting. Our first 3 meetings were basically, we were just championing for people to present something, not to be staring at each other, not to say anything. And for our last 2 meetings, we actually were just extending meeting time, and we're having very lively discussions, people really discussing meaningful things. And that took some time, took people knowing each other and building the trust, and now getting ready to build something else. So it is really a process. So I think this is what we are seeing in the region. And it's good that the teams are very diverse, but are very small. So you will not see like a large organization. You see small teams trying to leverage each other and to build trust in the region.
Thank you, Christine. Do you have anybody from Europe or no? Not this time. Okay, then I will skip to the African perspective. Martin will share something.
Yes, so Jean-Robert Hountomé of Africa CERT shared a very brief summary of some of the issues and struggles that African CERTs have. He noted that currently existing CERT teams cover less than 2/3 of the African internet ecosystem, and also that they face the following challenges: a lack of tools to facilitate information sharing, a lack of standards, lack of training, some trust issues, competition within and between countries, resource battles in terms of funding, language barriers across the continent, cultural barriers, and legal issues. And those are some of the issues that they're trying to tackle in their region.
Thank you very much. And then we're gonna move on to the other section. Well, it is still the same section, but on some other topics. One is whether or not there are entities out there who have encouraged their membership to establish cybersecurity strategies or incident response capabilities. So it turns out there are. So there are some from ITU, EU, African Union, and EPICTEL, and many other organizations apparently, and also at the country level, that sort of give not really an ultimatum, but also just to encourage people that, you know, to mitigate risk, you must have incident response capabilities. There are a couple of questions that are still not answered, and this is where we'd like to welcome everyone input and maybe encourage people who you know who can provide input for this type of discussion. So there are questions on, is there a level of ambition roughly in balance between regions? We're still trying to find that out. Are the activities noticeable in all regions or continents are at the same pace? I think from some of the description that we have, we know that they are not at the same level in terms of maturity, in terms of coverage and things like that. Do people have access to best practices and guidelines in the same way, right? And if not, then what are the challenges? And can representatives from regions financially afford to participate in meetings? Because we say that one of the requirements of exchanging information or sharing threat information is the trust factor, where you need to meet face-to-face the first time. So these are some of the other questions that we're trying to collect from participants. And if you have inputs on those, please feel free to provide them. I'm gonna move on in the interest of time. And I think we have discussed some of this earlier. And we also looked at services and regional collaboration provided by CERTs and CERTs. So we have already mentioned that there are a number of platforms at the global, regional, or national level. And there are also physical meetings to facilitate, and it is important for people to get acquainted and establish trust for future cooperation. There was an interesting discussion on the cost of CERTs. So some people were asking that if I want to set up this capability, what are the costs associated with it? Because funding and resources are very important, because some of the work are quite technical, so you expect that people undergo a certain type of training, but also there are certain tools that may cost money. So what are some of the challenges? Of course, in the end, people said that the cost will vary, obviously, from region to region and even between organizations, depending on the constituency that it is serving. You can imagine national CSIRT, operating or receiving processing incident at the national level or for the whole population, and maybe another organization who is just serving maybe 200 or 2,000 employees. So of course the cost will vary, but there are some common items that should be considered before you set up this capability. So things like salary for the employees, of course, equipment, tools, traveling to conferences and meetings, and so on and so forth. So have a look at the document to see what else people say are important for the cost of the CERT. Yes.
I have a question. I was wondering if the costs are made public anywhere.
It's hard to say, but I think maybe in some national CSIRT, they probably provide you information how much funding they receive from the government. So some of this information are probably public information, but if it's a private CSIRT operating in a company, then maybe it's difficult. Yeah. Yeah. Is that it? Okay. There's also some discussion on legal system, whether the legal system will stop CSIRT from collaborating or sharing information from one another. In some ways, yes, and I think there's some discussion on that later on in some of the section. But basically, from past experience, in many cases, sometimes even with some limitation, with some legal system in place, it could prohibit people from sharing information or certain type of information that could be very detailed or private. But having said that, CSIRT, the community, have been around for a long time, and people are sharing threat information that are very generic. And this is very important to make sure that everybody is safe when they are using the internet. Okay, now go back to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Adli. And in the interest of time, we have time for one contribution from the participants. Is there anyone who would like to provide comment on this section? Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, but I'm particularly interested by the legal aspects. And I want to hear a little bit about it. I know that if it is a CERT created officially by governments, they will, maybe if they are private also, they have and they cooperate together. But what if it is a private one and they are cooperating cross-border? What about the protection of privacy? What are the legal system? You could be suspect in one country and not in another. I want just to have an idea, that's it. Is there any rules or any best practices here or any, I don't know, body of rules that it is adopted already? And we can go, because frankly, we are very occupied by these aspects. We have the intention to create a CERT, and this is one of the things we are thinking about.
You'll find this discussion in another section as well, but definitely I think we take note from our own discussion that some of the specific examples are missing in this document. So while people are saying that there are some restrictions, especially in exchanging information, depending on the rules of the organization, depending on the rules of the country, so those things tend to limit sometimes information sharing or who you can share information with. But generally, information sharing and threat intel sharing are taking place at the same time, yeah, without the specifics of it.
I would just like to add that most of the information, I think, for example, 100 information that us in Brazil share with other people is about what's happening, not about who is doing what. So this is one point to take. Although we have a lot of teams working with police and working with law enforcement, for example, we in Brazil, we are the national CERT, but we only work with technical capabilities and trying to help the police to understand the technical. We don't involve ourselves in an investigation. So we need to follow our law no matter what. So we have a law that we never share information about who was involved and about details, but we have a lot of information to share about what's going on. What are the threats, what are the attacks, what are the new trends. So I don't think that that is a problem, and I think just to put, I don't know if it's in the other one, but there was a lot of discussion about, for example, teams that have a legal requirement to give that information to someone if that will prevent people to cooperating with that team. And I would say that that's probably going to happen. So you need to be careful if you create a legislation that will prevent your team from cooperating with each other. So.
Thank you. And one more thing. The three of us are not necessarily legal experts in any particular area. So I think what I will take away from this is that this is a very ripe area for future discussion. And I would also say there are some people that contributed to the mailing list that actually have much more expertise in that area. So you'll already find some comment there. And I'll take this away as a topic that's potentially interesting to look into further. Thank you. Patrick, I'm really sorry, but we're actually going to have to move along because we still have 14 minutes and we're about halfway. But definitely we can follow up on this discussion offline on the mailing list and in the document itself. The next section is on policy measures and private sector initiatives. And Adli, if you want, I can run through that really quickly. So we had some discussion on policy and how policy actually affects how CERTs are being operated. And these were some of the findings that made its way into the document out of the discussion. First of all, there have been recent calls from intergovernmental organizations and also national strategy documents that call for the creation of national CERT. In many other cases, national CERT or CERTs came to be due to a specific need, such as an incident. And it was determined that a top-down approach does not always work. Most important, outside of the way that the team was established, were trust and solid delivery of service based on commitments that were made by the CERT. When those aren't there, a CERT is without meaning and may not earn trust of others. The role of the government is very delicate. A bottom-up approach was generally preferred by the participants over top-down development. Trust wasn't really settled in legislation or using NDAs, for instance, but was facilitated over time. And then finally, positive roles of government include removing barriers to information sharing rather than actually compelling sharing between CERTs. Christine covered this earlier, so I won't go into it in too much depth, but we talked about guides to setting up CERTs, and we determined that there were already quite a few of those in existence, and it wouldn't make much sense for this group to duplicate those efforts. Legal and law. Governments drafting legislation on sharing must acknowledge that there are delicate areas in the execution of tasks of a CERT. CERT should especially work closely together with privacy regulators as they really support similar goals. Security and privacy are closely linked. Cooperation can be hampered by legislation. It's important that there are differences between the perception and the legal reality. This group should invite more relevant stakeholders in the area And solutions may not necessarily be new laws, but better agreements and methods of engagement. And then finally, we also briefly covered surveillance and net neutrality. And these were some of the findings of the group so far. Surveillance can be an impediment to trust. When there is a concern of involvement in direct law enforcement or surveillance operations, trust between CERTs tends to be lower than usual. Net neutrality also came up. Many CERT actually operate without the need to operate deep packet inspection. With encryption on the rise, deep packet inspection tend to be relatively limited to CERTs that provide service to a single organization, such as an enterprise. And it's important that CERTs with monitoring services, of course, follow applicable law and adhere to privacy expectations. We have time for one comment on this section. Anyone who wishes to contribute anything? Yes, the gentleman at the back.
Hi everyone, this is Ali from Deloitte, Turkey. I also chair a working group on the National Cyber Incident Response working group formed by the ICTA of Turkey. I want to contribute that it's your point on the perception, but the legal reality is very, very valid. I want to give an example from Turkey. The banking regulation in Turkey actually prohibits the sending of banking-related information abroad, and it needs to be stored and processed within the geographic boundaries of Turkey. However, there's a perception within the banking industry that also includes any information security-related information, such as getting any service from a CERT abroad, or even within the country that is outside of their own jurisdiction. So even though the legal reality doesn't really mandate that, there's a perception that they have to work within their own resources, which oftentimes results in a bank having a very poor level of service when it comes to providing a CERT, or none at all.
Excellent comment. Thank you very much for contributing. Now we'll move into the next section, what worked well.
Moving on to the next section. So we have a section where we asked the people who participated in the discussion on what worked well so that this could be in the best practice. So there were a few comments there. Much of it are obvious. CERTs have been working well together, sharing information for many, many years. Much of this is due to the fact that most CERTs need to respond to similar threats. So it is logical that they share information about how to respond to malware, how to respond to phishing, how to respond to identity theft, and so on and so forth. Capability building is another area that has received attention to ensure that CERT professionals have relevant skills to respond to incidents. So everybody agreed that capability building is very important, and a lot of CERTs do allocate resources towards that. And there is a global benefit if this is achieved, so that if everybody have the right skills to deal with incidents, we could make the world a better place, so to speak. But everybody believed that there's a lot of things that could be done to improve further in terms of outreach, reaching out to certain pockets of the society or the region or the community. Maybe some sector are a bit behind compared to others. Banking might be very advanced, but there could be some other sector, education and things like that, who probably need a lot of help in this domain. There are many ways to establish CERTs, but there is a consensus that there are common logical steps for establishing a CERT. I don't want to go into this, but in a document, there are maybe 5 things that you must consider before establishing a CERT, so that your CERT could be successful and delivering what it is meant to do in the beginning. And everybody also agreed that because this document, when it was being made, most of the participants were from the technical CERT community, so maybe there are things that are overlooked, and everybody agreed that we need to present this to the multi-stakeholder community so that other requirements for establishing and ensuring the success of CERTs are also being included in this particular document. So I only have that for this particular section. If there is any input for this, I would like to welcome you. I guess not. Then, okay, we move on. There's one. Ah, oh, yes, please.
We have a remote participant, name is Benjamin, and he is asking something. I'm reading. Is it appropriate for private sector like the banking sector to be instrumental or influential to creating a cybersecurity policies? In most cases, just to have a legal tool or framework to mitigate their financial risks, and should they be involved in national CSIRT? Okay.
So it's a great question. The topic of creating the cybersecurity policies, I think, is slightly out of scope for this session. It's a great question, but I don't think it's really within the scope of this document to try and address it. Regarding the international CERT community, there are actually many examples of financial institutions, but also other members of industry to participate in the global CERT community. For instance, some of the organizations we mentioned earlier have very wide participation from both government, industry, academia, and even some civil society. And I think that's something that should absolutely be encouraged. Because in the end, when it comes to responding to incidents, we're all in this together. And we need to find ways to make sure that we can find partners that can help us deal with an incident. So I hope that addresses the question that Benjamin posed. We have time for one more comment. Okay, Jordana. Yes, you go ahead first.
Just a very quick comment. It was just to add on to what you mentioned from the last question from the remote participant. Just an example of, I think, what perhaps part of what the question was addressing was how can CERTs in financial sector work with other CERTs, and do they have a role? And I would just say that I think that they have a very significant role, which Martin just mentioned as well. But from our own experience dealing with DDoS attacks against our financial institutions in the United States over the past couple of years, our organization has worked very closely with the financial services sector and the information sharing and analysis centers in that sector that are comprised of sort of like organizations from the various banks, and that cooperation with the partners in the private sector was critical to dealing with those events. So I think just to say that there's a very important role that goes across sectors in dealing with responding to various incidents.
Thank you. And I recognize you had is it a question or
No, it's a question. I want to understand what it is meant by reflect multi-stakeholder requirements for establishing and ensuring success of CERT. Who is concerned by the multi-stakeholder requirements here?
Okay, so that is basically just saying that, when we prepared this document, it was prepared in a very short period of time, and most of the contributors are from the technical communities. So there is a general consensus within, the participant of the discussion that we should get more inputs from others in other sectors.
I really apologize. I recognize you still had a comment, but we will have to move on. We can continue the discussion one-on-one afterwards, or on the mailing list, or through the comment system. You also have the next section, Adli. Yes.
So the next section is unintended consequences of policies intervention. Some of these are probably repetitive of what we have discussed previously, but I'm just going to highlight some points in that particular section. Of course, the document has more details on this. So we've said earlier that top-down approaches from government on creating CERTs do not always work well. It's always about trust. There is a consensus that at the political level, sometimes that the work of CERT are not fully understood, thus creating policies that are counterproductive or inhibit, the function of a CERT. The reporting path of a CERT may also hamper how others may share information or cooperate with them, right? So sometimes in meetings, people do discuss on how your team or your organization handles security incidents, and when they find out that, whenever we share information with you, you need to escalate this to another party, then maybe they say, okay, from now on, I'll have to be careful and not share so much information with you. cooperation and development of CERTs in different parts of the government is an area where the group sees potential for future multi-stakeholder discussion, right? So again, as we said earlier, this is, people believe that, different sectors should have CERT capabilities. Part of it is because maybe sometimes the threats are unique for that particular sector. As Jonara mentioned about the banking sector, they see DDoS, they see banking malware and things like that. There are concerns about laws around data or data privacy might impact the work of CERT, particularly for information sharing. I think we said this earlier as well. And another ripe area for a multi-stakeholder discussion is the impact of privacy legislations on the work of CERT. So we didn't get that much input in this domain simply because there were not many expertise or experts in this area in our group. And I think that's basically it for my section. Do we have any contribution?
Two seconds. I think what we're seeing, there are two projects I was just saying to Jordana within the EU that are looking at the legal side of this that ties back to Schengen area, as it's now being called, and various other pieces. And we've just had a large panel session downstairs. The point that I would make here is that the legal paradigm, I think it's highly unlikely you're going to see a special legal paradigm specifically for CERTs. So really, this seems to be splitting into those which are in the intelligence community and national security space and those that are not. And we can have debates around the edges of that. But broadly speaking, that's roughly where we seem to be. I say we in an international sense. So what I would recommend is that all this dialogue really does need to understand what's happening in the legal communities, and this was a group of lawyers downstairs.
Can I just follow up on that really quickly? I just wanted to know what the names of those projects were.
The Network Information Security Platform, which supports the NIS directive under the EU cybersecurity strategy, and the EU Project Mapping, which is mapping the internet.
Thank you. We'll make sure that those are also reflected in the comments.
I can be a contact for both.
The gentleman at the back.
Hi, my name is Nicola Reis and I'm from the College of Europe. And to follow up on this, and it was also part of my question a little bit earlier on, when we started the discussion clearly mentioned that at the moment there's very little notion of hierarchy between different CERTs. And my question is following up on the distinction between those working in the intelligence community and those working in other communities. And with your comment that you said earlier, where ANISA's report was stating from 50 CERTs to about 200 or plus today, won't we arrive at a need where realistically we will need a hierarchy to allow for full cooperation? Or is this something, do we actually think that the trust system can work with entities, with a number of entities that keeps growing every day?
Do you want to take this one?
I think this is a good question. I think it comes from this mindset. I know that we need to take into account that the internet is not a hierarchy. We are networks of networks. And we are securing our own networks. And we are part of this ecosystem. So we cannot enforce something, and really I think it's been working on trust, because you cannot just like say I have to report. So some of the things that are creating tension, and what we said before about regional specificities, and when you try to enforce that you have to report to X or Y, you cannot really, it's not working. This is some of the things that is inhibiting people sharing information because they don't know where that information is. And there is a lot of work at the end that you need to get your networks better. You need to respond to incidents, and you will resort to who can help you. So I think it goes back to what I think marketing said about what worked well, that people are seeing that really what works well, and you are a CERT that's effective if you have good services, and then if people perceive that you are helping them to get better. And then it doesn't matter that much if you are government, private sector, not-for-profit, or who, because really it will all depend on trust, and especially across borders, it's all about trust. So I think it sums up.
Great, thank you. We'll move into the final section, and then at the end we'll open it up for final comments. That section is unresolved issues, insights that we gained, and next steps. First of all, unresolved issues. We found that there's really enough room for further discussion on what is a national CERT, how is it defined, and what is really a CERT of last resort. What does it mean? Where does it work? Where does it work less? Second, we found that we really need to open up this document to some of the other stakeholder communities even more than just in this mailing list, because we saw a lot of participation from technical community, a little bit less from some of the other communities, and we really hope this meeting can kickstart that process so you all provide input. Then we found that the cost of participation for developing countries in the CERT community and the international processes that exist is very interesting for future debate. What are the priorities there, and how can that type of work be funded? Then there are organizations that only work for their own constituency, and organizations that assist their customers or actually provide CERT type services for work, which is something that isn't well covered in the document today. And then finally, is there a role for CERT teams in addressing the root causes of incidents? One of the participants mentioned earlier that their CERT actually does that type of work. Is that something where there's more discussion possible, for instance, with other communities like law enforcement? Then some of the insights that we gained, first of all, that the term CERT was more preferred over others, that there are different types of CERT and that they're really distinguished based on the services they offer, that there is a legitimate need for them to work together, accept information from others to be able to deliver on their core goals, that cooperation really is rooted in trust rather than legislation in many cases, that success of a CERT is tied to correctly determining the deliverables and making sure that there's a good perception of what those deliverables are with the other stakeholders, that there are already many best practices out there which are freely shared and result out of those existing collaborations, and that there is a need for some type of CERT of last resort, a team which can take at least some level of ownership if no other parties are available to take it. And then finally, this is where I would really like to open it up to you. What are some of the things that we can do to have better multi-stakeholder dialogue? First of all, we need to find mechanisms to raise challenges that the CERT community faces to other stakeholders and get your input. And we could do that by inviting those stakeholders to the meetings of international CERTs, but maybe it's more cost effective to share the knowledge that is created in the CERT community at some of those stakeholder events, such as the IGF. And this is really the end of what we've done so far, and where we really want you to provide input on what needs to happen next. So please, we're technically over time, so feel free to leave whenever you see fit. But otherwise, I would very much invite you to take this time to share your thoughts and ideas. And I'll actually go to the next slide, which has the link to the review page, where you can also provide review and comment if you weren't able to do so today. So please, the floor is open for any other contributions from the participants. Yes, Patrick.
I was just going to say, you've asked for comments and information. I think that the detail of the operational experience between CERTs is one set of dialogues which is really rich. There's a whole nother set of discussions involving other actors, which is to do with enabling the wider developments. And it's everything from the legal to the information. One of the things we're discussing in the EU is about to do a survey on PKI federation at level 3 or higher, because you can't, in our policies that we've written so far within the working groups, is that you can't share information systemically unless you're operating at PKI level 3 in a federation construct. So we're actually going to nations to ask what their maturity is. I just give this as an example because it affects law enforcement interoperability, it affects supply chains, and so on. So I would offer to you that you may want to think about which groups you want to bring together for the kinds of things that you want to cover. So first would be excellent for some of the tactical stuff, but maybe not so good for some of the strategic stuff, maybe.
Excuse me, I wonder if we can see the creation of CERT, because of the services it provides, as a future investment, because actually the cybersecurity is becoming the concern of everybody, and it's becoming the buzz. We do need cybersecurity wherever we are. and in whatever sector. So if it was to be seen as in the future as a new industry, who is going to provide the basics, who is going to provide the help to do something that is professional and trustful?
Thank you. It's very good feedback. And there is a lot of information that is already available from the current document. And also in particular, there is a link there which has a link to all the external resources that exist from the various organizations. Yes, so on that site you can go to a link that says other resources, and it will have a lot of the information that's already available from many of the organizations that was mentioned. And I think what I'm hearing in your question is that it would be helpful to make sure some of that is put together and available in an easy way for people that actually want to. Yeah. Thank you very much. Any other comments from the participants?
If no, please allow me. We are actually looking for a model that is working. If you have one, please go ahead and tell us about it.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So case studies might be a very good idea of how people have actually done it. So, yeah, would case studies help address that? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, one final time, are there any further comments? No. In that case, I would like to thank you all very much for participating today. I realize we were very stretched for time and that limited the opportunities for interaction, but please use these resources, provide your comments, provide your feedback. Right now it looks like the document review period ends tomorrow. That having been said, we are working with the IGF to get an extension on that, so hopefully there will be opportunity for at least a few more days to do that. But for now, I would recommend, yes, I would recommend for now, try to get your input there by tomorrow. If that doesn't work, Christine was just mentioning, the mailing list will remain open and hopefully it can stay a resource for the future to have these types of discussions. So thanks again very much, and I hope you have a very exciting IGF.